Joined by Rajan Mathews, Director General of Cellular Operators Association of India, for his view on the call drop compensation. And we also have with us our Chandrashekar, former Telecom Secretary and the current President of Nasscom, also joining in. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining in this discussion. Mr. Rajan, I'm coming to you first. Let me ask you about Supreme Court's specific observation about how the law needs to be taken up, or rather the Parliament must have a specific legislation on call drop and that it can't be a notification. So it's a big relief for you, sir, today, yes, but the fact is that call drop has not been addressed yet. That issue still remains. How can the Parliament take this up in a legislative format?
So, first of all, I'm not sure that we agree that the matter of call drops has not been addressed. I think Mr. Sood has made it clear that all of our operators have made substantial investments and progress. And I think if you look at the TRAI's quality of service requirements of 2% and 3% per cell tower, you'll find that all of our operators are principally in compliance with the quality of service. Now, not to say that there are not pockets in various areas that require continuous attention, but that is something that we are very focused on. The point that we have all along said is that, look, this issue of penalties is not the right way to address the problem. The root problems are very clear to us and hopefully have been recognized in the Supreme Court order. It's about coverage, it's about cell towers, it's giving us right of way, it's giving us affordable spectrum. Those are the root causes, and the Ministry of Telecom, the Honorable Minister, is already working with us in opening up defense lands, opening up government buildings, helping us with the local municipalities to give us permissions to put up the towers. I think that's the way to go forward.
Okay, I'll come back to that point, Mr. Mathews, but Mr. Chandrashekhar, let me ask you about the point that the Supreme Court made on the penalty being illegal. What, according to you, can be the legal way that the government can attain to ensure that the standard of service and the call drop issue is tackled and does not arise again?
Well, you know, the Supreme Court has called the order unreasonable, arbitrary and non-transparent. I don't want to comment on either the Supreme Court order or the legality of what Trai has said. But the fact is that there have been a lot of complaints with regard to call drop, and the question that still remains is that while on one side maybe there have been improvements in certain areas, as has been pointed out, but where do actually the consumers go for redress? Where do they go when they have a problem? How do they, compensate? How do they compensate themselves for failures in the quality of service? There may be many factors behind the problem. I think some of them have been mentioned by Rajan. It's either lack of infrastructure or lack of spectrum or lack of adequate rules for sharing of the spectrum, or lack of permissions for installing the towers, or lack of adequate finance for the investment based on the quantum of investment made in spectrum. So there are a lot of such factors. But I think the important thing is that there has to be a plan of action on how these core issues or the root causes can be addressed, and it has to be addressed in a time-bound manner. Second thing is that there has to be some kind of a mandate on the quality of service and some methodology for enforcement between the TRAI, the government and the operators. I think this plan of action has to be agreed, as well as the enforcement mechanism. Otherwise, I think the consumers will not have any redress.
So, Mr. Mathews, let me pose that question to you. Where can the consumers go? Where can the customers go? I agree that the network is being worked upon, but the fact is that the call drop issue is a concern for customers across the board. I've seen a call drop of 3 to 4 today itself. I want to understand, what can customers do to get some kind of redressal on this issue?
So first of all, I would like to say that it's not an across-the-board problem. Again, let's go back to what the Trai itself says are the quality of service standards. We clearly admit that there are pockets and regions. For example, if you are in Delhi, Luton zone is going to be a continuous problem until such time as we can get our cell towers located there. And this happens in just about all of the major urban areas that we are faced with. But let me get back to the issue of the consumers. First, obviously, the consumers have recourse with the operators. If that fails, they can obviously go to the commission. There are consumer redressal.
So what is the recourse that the
we
operators can give? You know, if you can point by point, what are the recourse that telecom operators are working on to give to the customers, to give some kind of compensation, be it in the way of free calls, be it in the way of some kind of a reimbursement whatsoever? What are the recourse that operators are working with on a case-to-case basis?
So first of all, let me ask, you know, we've all of us gone to per second billing so that at least from an economic perspective, that consumers don't have an economic disincentive as a result. And let me tell you that we make no money as a result of you initiating another call. But let me ask the particular fundamental issue, what is there to be done if a consumer experiences a call drop in a particular area? By trying to compensate the customer, the call drop in that area is not going to go away. If you're
I agree with you.
compensate the customer so that they can enjoy it somewhere else, I don't think that makes sense.
I agree with you, sir. But okay, and I'll come back to this point. Mr. Chandra, I want to understand from you. You indicated that there has to be a mandate to ensure that customers' needs are met and addressed and their issues are redressed. But what can that mandate be, and how can the government take this up in a legislative manner? That question to Chandra, and I'll take that up with Mr. Mathews.
Well, I think first of all, you know, there are certain factors which may be legitimate. For example, if a telecom operator does not get permissions to set up a tower, then of course there is no way that the call drops can be prevented or that they would be addressed. The second thing is that in terms of any limitations in terms of the spectrum availability, in certain pockets again this is an issue. But these will therefore have to be addressed not at a very broad level, but it will have to be gone into in depth, and it has to be looked at area by area. But I think the key question is, once that has been done and once it is agreed that certain actions will have to be taken, and it's quite clear that some of these, that while many of these actions will rest with the telecom operators, some of the actions will have to be taken by the government or the telecom authorities who give the permissions, and some of them maybe by the regulator in terms of laying down certain standards. Again, you know, the standards which are laid down, the problem which arises is that the standards you know, aggregate this information at a certain level, but that does not necessarily address the question of, you know, in certain areas the quality of service being poor. We are not talking necessarily about people who are mobile and who are moving from an area which has good coverage into some other area which has poor coverage. That is a different kind of problem. But even while you are within a certain area, the call dropping repeatedly, I think that's certainly something which needs to be addressed, and nobody would argue
but sir,
that
do you
that's the
believe
kind of
that
service we should be satisfied with.
Do you believe that in that case there is a case to make it a legislation at this point in time?
I think the first question is to actually you know, have that plan of action which looks at all of these aspects.
Okay.
I certainly think that there are you know, powers which are there with the government and with the TRAI, which could be exercised you know, to enforce whatever plan is agreed upon.
Okay.
But I think to have a credible plan which everyone agrees is doable within the you know, within the existing constraints, I think that is the critical first step. It's not going to happen just by saying, okay, now whether you have towers or not and whether you get permissions or not, you have to maintain this level of service. Nor is it going to be sorted out by somebody saying, okay, this is the percentage which has been indicated, and if you bulk all our calls together in all the areas, then we are within that quality of service within the license area.
All right.
I think it has to be looked at a more granular level also.
All right, we're very tight on time, Mr. Mathew. A quick last word from you. What is being done right now? As you said, you've been working with the telecom regulator to create and increase investments, improve the infrastructure. Right now, what is your mandate over the next couple of months to improve the infrastructure and increase investments?
Yeah, so clearly we're very focused on this, and I think let me just highlight a couple of things. First of all, working with the Honorable Minister's help itself, We have now been asked to locate on government buildings. We are working with the NDMC areas. We're dealing with local government officials to be able to put our towers on government buildings, government land. That's clearly happening. We're basically looking at spectrum trading and sharing to aggregate the spectrum that we have, use the spectrum more efficiently. We have put up over the last 3 months itself over 65,000 towers or so, 70,000 towers across the land. So we're making the investment.
Right.
We're continuing to make offers to local municipalities for payments, increase the payments so that we can expedite the cell tower clearances. All of that is being worked on.
All
So
right,
we're not
sir.
standing still, and we're working towards ensuring the customers get good experience.
All right, sir. So, Mr. Mathews, Mr. Chandrashekhar, many thanks for joining in on this discussion. And Mr. Mathews, congratulations again for that big win today.